Long ago, the Zuni people who inhabited what is now New Mexico and Arizona spoke in hushed tones of a terrible force that lived deep within the mountains, a being whose very name could freeze the bravest hearts with fear. This creature was Atahsaia, a monstrous ogre with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The towering peaks that surrounded the village were not just natural boundaries, they were the domain of a nightmare that stalked both day and night. Atahsaia was no ordinary predator. Unlike the spirits and gods that watched over the Zuni, he was a force of chaos, driven by cruelty and hunger. His presence was often felt long before it was seen. A cold wind from the mountains, the uneasy silence of the forest, or the sudden disappearance of a village maiden. This is the story of Atahsaia, the cannibalistic demon of Zuni mythology. Atahsaia emerged not from the hands of the creators or gods, but from the chaos that swirled at the fringes of the world. He was born in a time when darkness and light clashed, and not all things that emerged were good or balanced. Some Zuni elders believed that Atahsaia was not always the terror he became, but that he was once a spirit of the earth, connected to the wild and untamed aspects of nature. However, unlike other spirits who sought to bring balance, Atahsaia was consumed by the darker side of existence. Over time, he fed on the negative energies, anger, greed, and hunger that swirled around him. These energies distorted his once mundane form, turning him into something monstrous, a being ruled by his most primal instincts, the need to consume, to destroy, and to dominate. His transformation from an earthly spirit to a demon was not immediate. Legends suggest that he may have once walked among humans, studying them and learning their ways. But as he became more twisted, he grew to resent the humans for their fragility and dependence on the gods for protection. This resentment fueled his transformation into a predator, and eventually, Atahsaia withdrew from the world of humans entirely, retreating to the deepest caves and the most remote mountain ranges, where he could nurture his growing hunger in isolation. Over generations, the stories of Atahsaia's origins became clouded. Was he born evil, or did he choose that path? Was he a test from the gods, or a mistake of nature? Regardless of these uncertainties, one thing became clear to the Zuni people. Atahsaia was no ordinary creature. He embodied the destructive forces that lurked just beyond the world of order, a reminder that chaos was never far away. Atahsaia was unlike any creature the Zuni people had ever seen, and those unfortunate enough to survive his presence described him in terms that chilled the bones of even the bravest warriors. Standing at a height that dwarfed even trees, Atahsaia's very form inspired terror. His skin, often likened to stone or rough bark, was said to be impenetrable by normal weapons, providing him with a natural armor that made him nearly invincible in battle. This tough exterior was cracked and jagged, as though the earth itself had formed him from its most ancient rocks. One of Atahsaia's most distinguishing features was his grotesque face. His eyes glowed an eerie red, as if they burned with the inner fires of hatred and hunger. These eyes allowed him to see in the darkest of nights, giving him an advantage over any prey that dared to move under the cover of darkness. His nose was broad and flat, flaring with every breath, and his mouth was filled with rows of sharp, jagged teeth. These teeth were said to be capable of tearing through bone with ease, making his hunger for human flesh all the more terrifying. Atahsaia's claws were another feature that set him apart from any human or animal. They were long, black, and razor-sharp, capable of ripping apart trees, stone, or flesh with equal ease. These claws were his primary weapon, and when he hunted, he used them not only to kill but to capture and drag his victims back to his lair in the mountains. His hands and feet were enormous, each digit tipped with these deadly claws, and they left deep marks in the ground wherever he walked, a sign that Atahsaia had been near. Though his size and monstrous features were enough to terrify, it was Atahsaia's cunning that made him a truly formidable foe. His large, muscular body allowed him to move quickly despite his size. He could stalk his prey with a surprising stealth, blending into the shadows of the wilderness. Atahsaia's immense strength allowed him to lift boulders and crush entire trees with little effort, and it was said that his roar could shake the ground and cause small landslides in the mountains. Atahsaia's appearance was not just frightening because of its physical horror, but because it reflected the chaotic and destructive forces he embodied. He was a living reminder of nature's darker side, the side that humans could not tame. Every part of his form served a purpose in his relentless pursuit of victims, and no detail of his appearance seemed out of place in his role as a creature of pure malevolence. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Atahsaia's appearance was the way he seemed to blend into the landscape. His stone-like skin made him look as if he had risen from the earth itself, and some said that when he stood still he could pass for part of the mountain. His connection to the natural world, combined with his monstrous form, suggested that he was more than just a beast. He was a force of nature, one that could not be easily defeated or contained. As frightening as his physical form was, it was Atahsaia's eyes that haunted those who encountered him. Those red orbs seemed to burn with an insatiable hunger, and once they locked onto a victim, it was only a matter of time before he would strike. His eyes reflected his true nature, a creature driven by endless desire, unbound by the moral codes of humans or gods. Atahsaia was not merely a mindless brute driven by hunger. His behavior revealed a creature of calculated malice, whose actions were carefully planned to instill maximum fear in those who were unfortunate enough to cross his path. While he was driven by his insatiable appetite for human flesh, particularly that of young women, his methods of hunting and terrorizing were far more complex than simple hunger. His cruelty was intentional, and he seemed to take a twisted pleasure in the fear he provoked. Atahsaia did not hunt indiscriminately. He was a patient predator, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. His favorite times to prowl were during the darkest hours of the night, when the village was asleep and most vulnerable. He preferred to observe from the shadows, often stalking his prey for days before making his move. His intelligence allowed him to understand human behavior and use it to his advantage. He would watch as the villagers went about their daily routines, waiting for a moment of weakness. When a young woman would venture too far from the safety of the village, or when a group was distracted by celebration or mourning. One of Atahsaia's most feared tactics was his ability to silently approach his victims. Despite his immense size, he could move with astonishing stealth, slipping through the underbrush or lurking in the shadows without making a sound. This gave him the element of surprise, allowing him to abduct his prey before they even realized he was near. His silent approach contributed to his reputation as an unstoppable force of nature, a predator that could not be evaded. His behavior was also marked by a sense of arrogance. Atahsaia believed himself to be invincible, and he relished the terror that his name alone inspired. When he captured his victims, he often toyed with them, allowing them to believe they had a chance of escape before recapturing them with little effort. This cruel game was as much a part of his nature as his hunger, for Atahsaia seemed to take as much pleasure in the suffering and fear of his victims as he did in consuming their flesh. The mountain where Atahsaia made his home became known as a place of doom. The villagers avoided it at all costs, knowing that even approaching its base could attract the demon's attention. Those who had seen his cave spoke of the bones and remnants scattered outside, the remains of those he had devoured. Atahsaia did not hide his kills. Instead, he left the evidence of his terror in plain sight as a warning to others who might wander too close. Despite his hunger, Atahsaia was not a creature who killed out of necessity. He was not driven by survival, but by a deeper, darker impulse, the need to dominate and terrorize. His appetite was never satisfied, and even after consuming countless victims, he would continue to hunt, as if driven by a hunger that could never be fulfilled. This relentless pursuit of more victims made him all the more terrifying, for there was no end to his carnage, and no one was ever truly safe as long as Atahsaia lived. Atahsaia's hunting habits were not limited to women, though they were his primary targets. In times when the village was particularly vulnerable, such as during harvest season or festival preparations, he would broaden his scope, taking men and even children if the opportunity presented itself. He would even hunt down fellow demons as well, though this was much less common. His presence loomed over the village, a constant threat that could strike at any moment. For all his power and terrifying presence, Atahsaia was not invincible. Though his physical form seemed impenetrable, with skin as tough as stone and claws capable of tearing through anything in his path, he had weaknesses that could be exploited by those who understood him. These weaknesses were the key to defeating him, though uncovering them was no simple task. The Zuni people, through generations of observation and wisdom, had learned some of these vulnerabilities, though few were ever able to act upon them without fear of becoming another victim. One of Atahsaia's most notable weaknesses lay in his eyes. Though his glowing red eyes gave him the ability to see in the dark and stalk his prey with ease, they were also the most vulnerable part of his body. Unlike the rest of his stone-like skin, his eyes were soft, susceptible to damage by sharp weapons. It was said that if a warrior could pierce Atahsaia's eyes, he could blind the ogre, rendering him vulnerable and disoriented. However, getting close enough to strike his eyes was a challenge few could manage, given his strength and speed. Another weakness, and perhaps one of Atahsaia's greatest, was his arrogance. He believed himself to be beyond the reach of humans or gods, invulnerable to any harm. This arrogance often led him to underestimate his enemies, making him susceptible to traps or ambushes. While he was highly intelligent in the ways of hunting and tracking his prey, Atahsaia did not expect resistance from the villagers. He viewed humans as weak and easily conquered, and this overconfidence made him blind to the possibility that they could strike back. Atahsaia's hunger also served as a weakness. His insatiable appetite drove him to take greater and greater risks in his pursuit of human flesh. He could be lured by the promise of easy prey, allowing a skilled warrior or strategist to use bait as a means to draw him into a trap. This hunger clouded his judgment, making him more reckless and predictable in his movements. Many believed that his greed for more victims would eventually lead to his downfall, as it left him open to deception. Though he was a nearly unstoppable force of nature, Atahsaia was not without flaws, and it was through understanding and exploiting these weaknesses that the Zuni people would find a way to end his reign of terror. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. The first sign of Atahsaia's reemergence came not through his direct attacks, but through the growing fear that spread across the Zuni village. For many seasons, the villagers had been able to go about their lives, always aware of the legends of the demon in the mountains, but never expecting to encounter him themselves. Life was peaceful, until young women began to disappear. It started with a single maiden, a girl known for her beauty and grace. She had gone to the river at dusk to fetch water, accompanied by her friends. The sky had turned a deep blue as night approached, and though they knew the mountains held danger, they felt safe in their small group. The women laughed and talked as they went about their tasks, unaware that Atahsaia was watching them from the cover of the trees. His glowing red eyes followed their every move, and as they finished gathering water and began to walk back to the village, he struck. Atahsaia was swift and silent. Before the others even realized what had happened, he had snatched the girl and disappeared into the darkness. The others only heard a brief, muffled cry before everything went silent again. Panic spread through the group, and they rushed back to the village to raise the alarm. But it was too late. The maiden was gone. Her family searched the woods for days, but there was no trace of her. The elders, remembering the old stories of Atahsaia, warned the village that the demon had returned. At first, some villagers were skeptical. Surely such an ancient evil would not return after so many years of silence. But soon, other women began to vanish. Some were taken from their homes in the dead of night, while others disappeared while tending to their chores at the edge of the village. It became clear that Atahsaia was not only real, but actively hunting once again. The disappearances spread terror through the community. The village elders, who were the keepers of the ancient stories, warned that Atahsaia's hunger had been reawakened and that he would not stop until he had consumed his fill. The Zuni people responded by organizing nightly watches and placing guards at the village's borders. But no matter how vigilant they were, Atahsaia always seemed to strike where they least expected. He moved with terrifying precision, studying his prey and waiting for the perfect moment to abduct them. Families began to keep their daughters inside, refusing to let them go near the forest or the river. The once bustling village became eerily quiet as fear gripped the people. Women who had once felt free to roam the fields and woods now lived in constant fear of being taken. Despite the villagers' efforts to protect themselves, Atahsaia always seemed one step ahead, finding ways to circumvent their defenses and continue his reign of terror. One evening, the village was preparing for a festival meant to honor the gods, praying for protection from the evil that had befallen them. As the sun set, the people gathered in the village square, lighting fires and offering sacrifices. But even in the midst of their prayers, Atahsaia struck again. A young woman, Pahona, known for her beauty and kindness, was taken from the outskirts of the gathering. Despite the presence of the entire village, Atahsaia had managed to slip through their defenses and steal her away into the night. The loss of Pahona was a devastating blow to the village. She was beloved by all, and her disappearance left the people in a state of deep despair. Her family, like the others before them, searched the forests in vain. But Atahsaia left no trace. It was clear that no one was safe as long as Atahsaia continued to haunt the village, and the people realized that they could not rely on guards or watchmen alone. They needed divine intervention. With the disappearances growing more frequent and the villagers losing hope, the elders decided to seek the help of the village's strongest warrior, Atahsaia. Atahsaia had defended the Zuni people in times of great peril before, and his wisdom and courage made him the ideal figure to confront the demon. Alongside his brother, Matselema, the two brothers were the twin gods of war and were known for protecting humanity from the forces of darkness. The elders believed that with their help, they could finally rid themselves of the monstrous Atahsaia. Upon hearing of the Maidens' disappearances and the terror gripping the village, Atahsaia agreed to help. He knew that Atahsaia was not just a physical threat, but a cunning enemy. To defeat such a creature, a straightforward attack would not suffice. Instead, Atahsaia devised a plan that combined strategy, divine power, and Atahsaia's own weaknesses against him. First, Atahsaia studied the habits of Atahsaia, paying attention to the times and places where the demon was most likely to strike. He observed that Atahsaia preferred to take his victims at night, under the cover of darkness, often targeting isolated areas around the village. This pattern revealed a crucial weakness. While Atahsaia was a formidable predator, his arrogance made him predictable. He always sought the easiest and most vulnerable prey, which Atahsaia planned to exploit. Atahsaia crafted his trap carefully, knowing that luring Atahsaia would require more than just bait. The demon was intelligent and would not fall for obvious tricks. To deceive Atahsaia, Atahsaia used a combination of divine magic and physical preparation. He created a decoy in the form of a young maiden, fashioned from sacred materials that only the gods could manipulate. This decoy, infused with the scent of a human woman, was placed in a secluded area near the forest, exactly where Atahsaia would expect to find his next victim. To further strengthen his plan, Atahsaia called upon his brother Matselema for assistance. Together, they blessed their weapons, arrows crafted by the gods, and spears imbued with divine power. These weapons were designed to penetrate Atahsaia's stone-like skin, targeting his vulnerable eyes and heart. They also set up traps around the decoy, using concealed nets and tripwires, knowing that even if Atahsaia detected their presence, the element of surprise could be enough to give them the advantage in battle. As night fell, Atahsaia and Matsailema prepared for the confrontation. They positioned themselves in the shadows, hidden among the trees, while keeping a close watch on the decoy. The air was thick with tension, and the forest seemed eerily silent, as if all of nature itself was holding its breath. Hours passed, and the village waited anxiously, praying for the gods' success. Finally, as the moon rose high in the sky, Atahsaia appeared. His hulking form emerged from the shadows, his glowing red eyes scanning the area for prey. He had been drawn in by the scent of the decoy, his hunger driving him toward what he believed would be an easy catch. Atahsaia crept closer, his movements almost silent despite his size, and as he approached the decoy, he sensed no immediate danger. He was unaware that he was walking straight into Atahsaia's trap. At the moment Atahsaia reached out to seize the decoy, Atahsaia and Matsailema sprang into action. With lightning speed, they launched their divine arrows, aiming for Atahsaia's vulnerable eyes. Atahsaia roared in pain as the arrows struck their target, blinding him and causing him to stumble. Disoriented and enraged, Atahsaia thrashed about, trying to locate his attackers, but the gods were too quick and agile for him. Atahsaia's plan had worked perfectly. Atahsaia, blinded and unable to navigate the terrain as he normally would, had fallen into the very traps the brothers had set. The concealed nets and tripwires ensnared his massive form, limiting his movements and giving Atahsaia and Matsailema the opening they needed to strike the final blow. But Atahsaia was not defeated yet. Despite his blindness, his primal instincts kicked in, and he lashed out at his unseen attackers, swinging his massive arms with terrifying force. Trees snapped like twigs under the weight of his blows, and the ground quaked with each step he took. Atahsaia's rage only seemed to make him more dangerous, as his raw power threatened to destroy everything in his path. The forest echoed with his furious roars, as if the mountains themselves were crying out in anger alongside him. Though Atahsaia fought back fiercely, his strength and cunning were no match for the divine power of the twin gods. Matsailema struck the demon with a series of precise strikes, each one weakening him. Atahsaia used his blessed spear and plunged the weapon deep into Atahsaia's chest, aiming for the demon's heart. With a final desperate act of strength, he tore the spear from his chest, blood pouring from the wound. His movements became slower, more labored, but his rage had not diminished. As Atahsaia's life force withered away, he let out a final deafening roar that echoed through the mountains, before finally collapsing to the ground. With Atahsaia's body lying still and lifeless on the battlefield, Atahsaia and Matsailema knew they had won a decisive victory, but their mission was not yet complete. Beyond defeating the demon, they had one more task: rescuing the maidens that Atahsaia had abducted over the course of his terrifying reign. They had heard rumors of women still being held captive deep within Atahsaia's mountain lair, and their return would be the final symbol of the village's salvation. Atahsaia and Matsailema made their way up the steep path toward the ogre's cave. The air was heavy with the sense of death and decay, and a cold wind swept down from the mountains, as if nature itself was still mourning the lives Atahsaia had taken. The cave, which had once seemed impenetrable, was now just a dark, hollow shell. Yet within its depths, the gods could feel the lingering presence of those who had been trapped by Atahsaia's cruelty. Entering the cave, they were met with the chilling sight of scattered remains, bones of those who had not survived Atahsaia's hunger, a gruesome reminder of his monstrous nature. The air inside was thick and oppressive, a place that had housed only suffering and fear. Yet beyond the darkness, there was a faint glimmer of hope. As they ventured deeper, the cries of the abducted women began to echo off the cave's walls, weak but unmistakable. The women, too weak and frightened to respond at first, huddled together in the farthest corner of the cave. Their eyes, wide with terror, had been filled with the expectation of death. Among the captives was Pahona, the young maiden whose disappearance had marked a turning point for the village. She had been taken during the village festival, and her absence had filled her family with despair. Pahona stood among the survivors, her eyes shining with the first glimmer of hope she had felt since her abduction. With great care, Atahsaia and Matsailema helped the women out of the cave. The path down the mountain, though treacherous, seemed to symbolize their passage from darkness back into the light. As the group emerged into the open air, the sunlight bathed the maidens in warmth, the first they had felt in days. The sight of the village below, once thought unreachable, filled their hearts with joy and relief. The people of the village expressed their eternal gratitude to Atahsaia and Matsailema, offering prayers and sacrifices to honor the gods who had saved them. The twin gods, ever humble in their victory, reminded the villagers that the strength of their community had also played a role in their triumph. It was through the unity and faith of the people that the gods had been summoned, and together, they had overcome the great evil that had plagued their land. Atahsaia and Matsailema knew that their work was not finished. Though Atahsaia had been defeated, his body still lay in the mountains, a reminder of the darkness that had once threatened the village. The twin gods resolved to ensure that Atahsaia's spirit would never rise again, for such a force of evil could not be allowed to linger. But for now, their focus was on the healing and restoration of the people they had saved. Atahsaia's defeat marked the end of a dark chapter in the village's history. No longer would the people live in fear of his nightly hunts, and the maidens could once again walk freely without the shadow of terror hanging over them. The oppressive silence that had once gripped the village was lifted, replaced by the sound of laughter and celebration. Life returned to the village, and with it, a renewed sense of hope. The people rejoiced, not only for the return of their daughters, but for the knowledge that they were once again safe under the protection of the gods. The tale of Atahsaia's courage and the twin gods' victory over Atahsaia spread far beyond the village. It became a legend told around the fire, passed down through generations as a reminder of the gods' power and the strength that could be found in unity and faith. Warriors would remember Atahsaia's strategy, using it as a lesson in patience and wisdom, while villagers honored the gods with offerings, ensuring that their connection to the divine remained strong.